syllable slang. Listen up, open ears, let your mind go. Prop anonymous, y'all breaking down the
Yeah. Hey, what's good, everybody? This is Propaganda Anonymous, and you are tuned in to the Propanon Podcast. Join me as I explore topics discussed in the work of Robert Anton Wilson and interview some of the coolest people in the world. What do we talk about on the Propanon Podcast? We talk story. We talk symbolic anthropology, crime and criminology, alternative reality games and UFOs. We talk conspiracy theory, comedy, comic books and quantum physics, liberation theology, negative theology, terrorism and music, sex, magic and drugs, psychedelics, housing and love. This is the Propanon Podcast. Tune in.
Open your fucking ears, jackass.
All right, everyone, we're going to get right into it. In this episode, I interview Adam Gorightly, Discordian historian, researcher, and writer of some of the most interesting books I've read in years. What has he written? Well, Gorightly has written books like The Prankster and the Conspiracy, a biography of Discordianism co-founder Kerry Thornley, a very interesting read. He has also written the book Caught in the Crossfire, which was about the drama that occurred when Kerry Thornley was accused by Jim Garrison of being somehow involved in the JFK assassination. Another book that Adam Gorightly has written was called Historia Discordia, which is, the name kind of says it all. It has a lot of really great historical source materials from the original Discordians. Mr. Gorightly put in the form of a book. It's really cool. I definitely recommend that book for those who are interested in Discordianism and the work of Robert Anton Wilson. And Adam Gorightly's newest book is, for me, perhaps his most exciting. The book is called Saucers, Spooks and Kooks, UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius. Says a lot right there. So, wow, this book was so great. The interview was a lot of fun. Speaking with Adam Gorightly. When I spoke with him, the context around the topic of UFOs has changed when the U.S. government officially acknowledged their existence last year. Gorightly, he was... Okay. And what I really love about this book too is that Gorightly is not writing as an outsider looking in. You can tell by the way that he writes is that he was involved in that UFO researcher scene that was so big in the 90s. Perhaps got really sparked off when Agent Mulder from the X-Files, wanted to believe that there was something out there, and this book details some of the tropes, if not most of the tropes, that occur in the show X-Files around the notion of UFO abduction stories and the UFO conspiracy law and UFO conspiracy lore in general. It's all poured into this book. As you'll hear, Gorightly provides the history of modern UFO phenomenon with a skeptic's eye and finds possible reasons for these crazy stories. What do I mean? Well, some of these wild stories could be cover-ups for something a lot more regular happening, but yet illegal and something the government did not want everyday citizens to know. So better have them thinking about crazy, wild alien abduction, cattle mutilation, deep underground military bases where shape-shifting reptilian aliens drink the blood of young children. All that as a distraction to get people away from thinking or researching perhaps some atomic energy testing being done in the area and that causing the death of cows from radiation exposure, et cetera, et cetera. Gorightly gets into this in such a clear, concise way in his book, as I said, as he unpacks many of these tropes that have emerged within UFO conspiracy lore over the last 50 years, 60 years. What a great read this was. And through unpacking these tropes, okay. What a great read this was, and what a great interview this was, too. Why is this book important? Well, let's find out. Let's listen to Adam Gorightly and see what he has to say. What was the impetus of the book? What got the book started for you?
The impetus was a interview with a guy named Tal Levesque. Oh my gosh, more than 10 years ago or so. And that initially was just going to be a long article I wrote called My Breakfast with Tal, which appears as a chapter in the book. But then, as you'll discover if you read the book, Tal Levesque was key in propagating, among other things, the Dulce bass mythos. And so after I met with Tal and interviewed him and started interacting with him, I started looking deeper into the Dulce bass mythos. And so that original article I planned just kind of kept growing to the point where it really wasn't an article anymore. It was becoming a book. And beyond the Dulce bass mythos, I saw how a lot of these other stories in UFO lore were kind of all connected to Tal Levesque and the Dulce bass story, and Paul Benowitz and Richard Doty were connected to the Dulce bass story, but they were also connected with promoting the MJ-12 materials back in the 1980s, and that story kind of connects to Area 51 and what was going on there. So all of this over time just kept growing and growing. And like I said, I spent probably more than 10 years on it because it was one of those things that I'd work on for a while and put on the back burner. Then I was working on other, some of the Discordian related books, and probably about after I got all of those out of the way, about 5 years ago, I finally settled in, said, by God, I'm going to finish this book. And I finally did.
I think what's really well done is just how clearly you lay it out. Beginning with was it in 1950 when that book written by Frank Scully,
Mm-hmm.
based on an interview of that guy Silas Newton, and as you write in the book, um, the Scully was told that he was visited by some government agents who he was unsure of what department or where they were from, and they told him that the information that he put in his book was false, but to also keep putting it out there and I guess lecturing or talking about it to the media. Can we trace it through a little bit?
Yeah, and that's the story too. That there was a researcher named Carl Flock who looked into the Roswell crash, for instance, and he was a former CIA. He worked for the CIA in some capacity, so that's how he caught wind of that story, that these government agents, whoever they were, we're not quite exactly sure. There's no documentation beyond Carl Flock that actually happened. But so, you get into an area of what is disinformation as opposed to what is misinformation, and, disinformation is really orchestrated, targeted campaign to deceive or promote some false narrative. And so that's part of UFO lore over the years, the different disinformation. But then you have misinformation as well. People pick up on some of these false stories, or they unintentionally uh, pass along bad information, or sketchy information about some type of UFO events, not necessarily intending to spread disinformation, but spreading misinformation. So yeah, there's different types of bad information that get out there. And in the case of Scully is interesting in that book he wrote and repeated the story, which was based on bunk information that Silas Newton and this other character gave him or passed along, that there had been a crash in Aztec, New Mexico, and trying to remember the date they had on it, but it really doesn't matter. It was probably a bullshit story, but it was in the late 40s, and that kind of started the crash flying saucer mythos. And later, that Aztec story, or the story Frank Scully passed along, was basically repeated in the Roswell crash story. It had all the same elements, and you see these patterns again and again. There's been a number of quote unquote supposed UFO crashes that happened during that period, in the late 40s and 50s. And whatever actually happened, if there was crashes, I mean, in some accounts, they say it was government weather balloons, perhaps the UFO crash meme to cover up what was going on there with, a lot of the mogul weather balloons, for instance, which were used to basically weather balloons they'd launch, and the government was monitoring radiation levels of, if there was a atomic bomb testing going on in other places, Russia or wherever. Those balloons could pick up on that, and that's part of the whole Roswell crash mythos. There's different theories and explanations, and one of them was that it was one of these mogul balloons. And so, you get into disinformation, and you start asking the questions, well, was, this the whole Roswell crash story devised to cover up something else?
When was Project Gas Buggy?
Yeah, that's an important part of the Dulce Base story, and that was at 1967 in the area of Dulce, New Mexico. There were these experimental atomic bomb blasts, underground blasts, and what they were doing was basically it was an early form of fracking. They were trying to release natural gas reserves, then trap them, and be able to use those. And but it didn't quite work out. Once after the bomb blast, this is something the Department of Energy was doing. They couldn't control the gas, or the radiation was a byproduct that leaked out. So it was unsuccessful. But what is said to have happened in relation to the Dulce story, and this is one of the many theories or claims regarding that, was this bomb blast created an underground cavern, which was later expanded upon and was used to build this secret Dulce base, where supposedly aliens and the government would later have a secret treaty. And yeah, a lot to unpack here, but so when we get to this, kind of brings in the whole Paul Benowitz, Richard Doty story. And so that was 67 Project Gas Buggy. And that, like I said, that was in the area of Dulce, New Mexico, and the Hickory Indian Reservation. And in the mid-70s is when a lot of the cattle mutilations started in that area and across the American Southwest. And also in oftentimes in combination with these mutilations, there was UFO sightings. Sometimes there was black helicopter sightings. And conjunction with UFO sightings. And I get into Gabe Valdez. He was a state trooper there in Dulce, New Mexico. He was one of the first people looking into this phenomenon, along with a lot of other people trying to figure out what was going on. And so he became one of the advocates pushing to find out, who are mutilating these cattle and bringing them to justice. And along the way, he encountered all this high weirdness. Once again, strange lights that were seen in tandem or in the same areas as these mutilations, as well as sometimes, these military helicopters. And so there was a lot of theories swirling around what was going on here. One of them is that cattle really make good subjects for testing radiation and cancer. And so, that's one of the theories, that the government were testing these cattle. That's why the mutilations were happening, and that they were using reports or false reports of UFOs, once again in tandem with these helicopters. But inevitably, at the end of the day, there was so much going on here, and maybe so much disinformation and misinformation with these cases, that nobody could ever really figure out exactly what was going on with all of this. But this was an area, Paul Benowitz, who was basically a physicist, and he had a company called Thunder Dynamics. I'm forgetting the name now, but he did government contract and avionics and aviation. And he lived near Kirtland Air Force Base, and he was a UFO enthusiast, shall we say. He belonged to the APRO, which was one of the early UFO organizations, and he was also interested in cattle mutilations as well. And he was a friend of Gabe Valdez, and so he was looking into all of this stuff. And the thing that really got him going on UFO sightings was he lived adjacent to Kirtland Air Force Base, as I said, which hosts Sandia Labs and also the Monsanto's weapons area, that at the time, and we're in the late 70s, hosted the largest cache of nuclear weapon components. And it was over this Monsanto weapons area, once again in Kirtland Base, adjacent to his house, that he started seeing some strange lights, UFOs, right over this facility, which alarmed him. He felt it was a national security threat. He started filming these things. He also, kind of a mad genius dude, he was setting up different type of listening devices to pick up signals and whatnot. And he also started picking up these signals as well, which over time he began to believe were communications of aliens. And so he started reporting this to the officials at Kirtland Base, one of whom was Richard Doty, who plays a pretty large role in the disinformation angle of this story. And so, like I said, he reported that to the officials at Kirtland, tried to get a government contract from them to do more research and what was going on. And they kind of humored him, but he felt they weren't taking him seriously. And so he started contacting different state senators, or the U.S. senator for New Mexico. There was a couple, Pete Domenici and Harrison Schmidt. And he was passing on information, because one of the things that happened during this period, they had some sightings over Kirtland. This kind of plays into what's going on now, with this interest in UFOs or UAPs. Are they national security threats? Are they aliens? What the hell's going on? We have a report coming out. Could be any day now. Could be tomorrow. And when some of these events were happening over Kirtland, it was quite a serious thing that made it into the newspaper. In fact, one of these incidents, when the sightings took place, the power went completely off and offline. Everything went offline at the Albuquerque airport there, which is a huge, pretty big hub airport for that period. So that these threats of unidentified objects, UAPs, they call them, unidentified aerial phenomena, are not new. And during the 70s and 80s, particularly, they had a lot of these. They called them incursions over military bases. That's the common theme. A lot of these things happen over military bases. More recently, with these sightings, or over aircraft carriers adjacent to those or close to them. So that's kind of a common theme. But so what was going on at Kirtland? This was the late 70s into the 80s, when a lot of the stealth aircraft testing was going on. And a lot of it was going on there at Kirtland. That's some of the stuff that Benowitz was seeing, as well as I told you he was picking up these signals. That was later, as far as I've been able to determine. A lot of people who've looked into this, they were testing these laser communications with satellites. And so Benowitz was picking these up, and it became a concern with the officials there at Kirtland and the security people. They weren't so much concerned about aliens. They were concerned with Benowitz. Was he he was capturing all these signals, and what was he doing with them? Was he figuring out how this classified program worked with communicating to satellites? Was he passing on this information to spies, Russian nationals, Chinese nationals? A lot of those Russian and Chinese spies at the same time were infiltrating or interacting with different UFO groups. Of course, Benowitz belonged to those type of groups, and a lot of people involved in ufology and with these UFO groups at the time also worked in the civilian aviation industry. So you can see how these things all overlap. And so as this was going on at the AFOSI, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, in which Doty belonged to, there at Kirtland, started this counterintelligence operation. And that's the disinformation campaign. That's one aspect of the counterintelligence operation. And they started this to find out, what did Benowitz know? What did he figure out about all these things he was filming and making recordings of? And as part of this where Doty's role comes in there, was feeding these alien stories to Benowitz in the hopes that he would, for instance, call a press conference and say there's an alien invasion going on, and basically discredit himself. He didn't necessarily have a press conference, but this is kind of what happened to Benowitz over time, and he ultimately kind of went off his head with all of this stuff, and he had to be committed to a mental institution for a period of time.
One aspect of this information aimed at a target group or an individual, which is to have them float an idea that will later be disproven, or considered absurd and making them lose some sort of respect in the eyes of the public or whatever, but then also to weed people out, correct? Like also to float information to to see who takes it or something like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, that's what Doty got into trouble for. I mean, a lot of this is pretty murky, and we don't know things for sure. But I've been Greg Valdez has written a pretty good book on this. The Dulce story was Gabe Valdez's son, and that's what he said that when there was one point like in '84, it was around '84. It was after all. There was a FOIA released in the early '80s where Doty got kind of busted for leaking bits and pieces of classified information. Some of his, some of this information was that he passed on to other researchers. There was nuggets of true classified information in there mixed up with all the alien stories. And according to Greg Valdez, that's how Doty got in trouble, lost his ranking as a special agent, and eventually ended up in the mess hall there at Kirtland. But let's see, where was I going with this? Um, and so that kind of brings us to the. This is all related to the Dulce story because that was part of the disinformation passed on to Benowitz. So let me give you a little thumbnail of what Dulce base is or supposedly allegedly was, and and if you, I guess, if somebody went and Googled Dulce base, they'd come across stuff that basically said this. It was a rumored underground installation that was a joint venture, part of a secret treaty between aliens and the U.S. government. It's in the area of near Dulce, Hickapia, Hickory Indian Reservation, an area called Archuleta Mesa. And in this underground facility, like I said, there was this supposed treaty between reptilian aliens, I think alien greys are their helpers there. And the treaty basically said that, or the agreement between the government and the aliens was that the aliens would share their secret technology, and in return, the government would green light letting the aliens use humans to experiment upon. And and this led to these grisly experiments and, like, the alien human hybrids and the vats and everything you saw later on X Files in the mid '90s and other films. And all of this led to, supposedly, once again, this is the legend, the fabled Dulce War, where a bunch of workers, the government workers there, human workers, in cahoots with some aliens, formed this resistance to fight back against these experimentations, and war erupted, and 66 humans were killed, or 66 people that were part of this resistance. Some of them were aliens, I guess. It's all bullshit anyway, but this was the story. And from this, everybody died except this guy named Thomas Castello, who was like a lead worker there. Apparently had a flash gun that could vaporize the aliens, so he was able to hightail it out of there with video footage and photographs and everything that would blow the whistle on this secret program at Dulce. So that became the Dulce base story, and the Dulce War is part of that. But all of this, and that really started in the late '80s when that information people became aware of that, something called the Dulce Papers, which we can talk about maybe a little later if we need to. But this once again goes back to Benowitz, and it really came from information that he developed in the late 70s when he was writing these U.S. senators and different folks. Even wrote to President Ronald Reagan, alerting him what was going on, in his belief that there was a secret underground base at Dulce. In fact, one of the early documents Benowitz writes that he sent off to one of these senators, that he had knowledge of this confrontation and how the humans had abandoned the base. That's in one of the early documents that he sent out, and that he was also, like in the early 80s, developing some kind of space gun. So all of this stuff kind of worked itself into the Dulce base mythos. And another part of this is a lady named Myrna Hansen. I'm getting into a lot of details here, but you kind of got to tell the whole story. So
that sort of Paul Benowitz was thinking some out wild things based on strange lights that he was seeing. And when he spoke to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, they encouraged him to keep thinking such wild things, and then even sent out Richard Doty to encourage such wild thoughts. And that's kind of how this Dulce base papers mythos grew some legs, would you say, from that infusion of the, someone like Doty encouraging Benowitz in, delusion, his delusion.
in May of 1980, this gal named Myrna Hansen was with her son driving through Eagle Next, New Mexico, and she had a UFO sighting. She and her son, and the first thing they saw was a cow get sucked up into a spaceship, and then on like a tractor beam. And she and her son, shortly after, were sucked up in there, and they saw the aliens dissecting a cow. He had a damn mutilation going on in a flying saucer, and anyway, she witnessed this event, whatever happened, and afterwards she contacted the police there in Cimarron, New Mexico, and they didn't know what to do with this story, but they knew about Gabe Valdez. Uh, he was go-to guy for flying saucers and cattle mutilation stories. So Gabe Valdez was friends with Paul Benowitz at this point. He contacted Benowitz and to see if he could be of help, because Benowitz had contacts with his UFO organization. And it was Benowitz who brought in a hypnotic regression expert, Leo Sprinkle, to work with Myrna Hansen, and they did this regression in Benowitz's garage in his Lincoln Town car. He was adamant they put aluminum foil all over the car because at this point, Benowitz believed that the aliens were trying to beam them and tamper with their regressions of Myrna Hansen. Myrna Hansen remembered other incidents. They had a series of regressions. And one of these was her being taken to an underground base where she went under some type of medical experiment. She had an implant lodged in her head somewhere. And, a lot of the classic UFO ET tropes. And at one point, she broke loose and she saw these alien human hybrids in vats. And that seemed kind of like really one of the first versions of this story. So Benowitz, he, after hearing this, working with Hansen, now he began to believe that, yeah, it was this happened at Dulce Base, where she was taken to when she abducted, and of course, Benowitz and others encouraged, uh, or excuse me, Doty and others encouraged Benowitz along this line that there indeed was this secret base at Dulce. And one of the really mind blowing stories here, and this is
We have 1 minute on this session.
one of the mind blowing stories here. The UFO researcher Bill Moore was in the middle of this too, and Moore talked to Alan Hynek, who's famous in UFO circles. He worked on Project Blue Book, source for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. According to Hynek, who was still under contract with the U.S. Air Force at that point in time, he passed on a computer with software to Benowitz that would allow Benowitz to communicate with the alien. And so, yeah, Greg Bishop was the first one to really talk about that little bit of information in Project Beta, which was kind of controversial that, and people that are admirers or fans of Hynek were kind of outraged, and they still are, that, don't want to believe that he was involved in that. But wherever this computer came from, and allegedly it was the Air Force who put the software on that. There was other witnesses to this. I mentioned Greg Valdez. He and his father Gabe visited Benowitz and saw him interacting with this computer, and yeah, he thought he was talking to ETs, and the software would also produce these pretty primitive computer images of what the ETs supposedly looked like, and they were, insectoid and reptilian types. So you can see where a lot of these tropes, appear to have come from the whole Benowitz affair, as it's been called. So that kind of of Benowitz and the Dulce base story. I mean, we could get into a lot deeper into Dulce base mythos, but
It's like with UFO talk, you can always keep going deeper, right?
yeah,
The tropes, just like conspiracy theory or similar to conspiracy theories, are just inexhaustible almost, and you can just rearrange them and present a different angle of a story, which sounds like that is what has happened here with the Dulce papers, and also the MJ12 documents. And it seems like a major player in that obviously was Bill Moore, who came on the scene, I guess, as you write in your book, around 1980 with his book Incident at Roswell, which became a big commercial success, and that also promoted a trope as well, correct, in that book?
well, probably a number of them, but the crash saucers and all of this ultimately led to the MJ12 papers as well, which Moore was involved with. But yeah, the Roswell crash, that's like the mother of all the UFO crashes now, I guess. But it appeared to be, there was similarities there with the Frank Scully story in Aztec, and a lot of the same things. And as far as the witnesses, the original witness, Jesse Marcel, was interviewed by Stanton Friedman, who was a research partner of Bill Moore. And the original accounts, Marcel, who went and looked at the crash and took pieces away. He was like a Army intelligence officer. None of those early accounts talked about ETs. Those only later did. New ET witnesses supposedly, emerge, backing up the Roswell story. But and the deal here is that so 1980, the incident at Roswell comes out, and so this is becoming a pretty big story. And at that time, Moore was out doing promotion for the book when he was contacted by this shadowy figure later known as Falcon, who was this intelligence officer who said he was impressed with Moore's research. He thought he was a sharp dude or whatever. Maybe he was uh, just playing up to Moore to, basically to bring him into this tangled web that later became the Benowitz affair. But what he offered Moore at that time, this is like 1980, was a deal that Falcon, who claimed to be a government intelligence agent, pretty high level one, would share classified UFO material with Moore if Moore would assist in helping them monitor, infiltrate might be another word, the UFO movement, ufology, the different UFO groups. Because once again, you have concerns there that you had a lot of people involved in UFOs were also civilians involved in like different aspects of a lot of these classified programs, like the stealth bomber at that time or the space shuttle. And so Falcon wanted Moore to keep track on what was going on. What were these folks talking about? What were the stories in ufology? And it was through that nexus that Moore began interacting with Paul Benowitz around that time too, and passing to Benowitz sometimes dubious UFO documents that suggested, alien invasion, these type of things going on. So, those were, he had those connections. And so in 1984, these documents called the MJ-12 documents appeared out of nowhere. They appeared to come, they had a mailing address of Albuquerque, New Mexico, but nothing else. And they landed on the doorstep of a guy named Jamie Chandray, who was Bill Moore's research partner during that period. And what these documents ended up being, or what they claimed to be, were these classified things about this group called MJ-12, Majestic 12, that delivered a briefing to President Eisenhower in 1952, and it talked about, confirmed supposedly the Roswell crash and a couple of other UFO crashes, and that this MJ-12 group was in charge of the extraterrestrial situation, and that they had taken an alien in captivity at one point, and that they had put together some type of treaty with the aliens. So all of this happy horseshit was in these MJ-12 documents and subsequent documents that came out, which, interestingly enough, confirmed the Roswell story, which was Bill Moore's book. Later, the FBI got called into it, and they were, trying to figure out if these documents were legit, were, these classified documents that had been illegally leaked. Ultimately, the FBI came to the conclusion they were bogus, but they never could find out specifically where they came from. But and so this became a part of this overall arching story, you know, about the secret treaty with the aliens, and that kind of plays into all these other stories. The Dulce base story, Area 51 had a lot of the same legends that there were aliens there, underground, underneath the facility, some type of base, and all these bases, you know, especially the late 80 Area 51 were having all of these sightings, and so the government, it appears, or you know, people of associated with intelligence agencies like John Leary became pretty prominent as a ufologist during that period. He had intelligence agency background that they were basically pushing these ET memes and tropes to kind of this confuse and muddy the waters of what was going on with all the secret testing of craft during this period. And once again, putting out at times different information they would leak to different people like Moore that would put it in the UFO research community. And some of it was legit information about these secret programs, and they wanted to see, you know, like pass on some, for instance, this is just like an example, pass on a photo of what was alleged to be a UFO, but it was actually a secret government craft, and you know, pass this to maybe like a Russian spy, and to see what his reaction was if he actually knew that it was a government craft. Those type of things. That's all part of the spy craft, you know, to find out what other people know, to confuse them about what actually was going on with the secret testing, to interject the alien thing in there, to release phony documents for one reason or another.
Yeah, and one thing I thought was very interesting in the book as well was when you were speaking about Bill Moore and Chandira's MJ12 document find, was that how they sat on the information to maybe research it and see how much of it might have been true. But while they were sitting on it, they were told, or at least Moore was told, that, okay, you're taking too long. Someone else is going to release it, the UK researcher Timothy Good. And, you know, that being an interesting sort of, that also maybe being a technique as well, right? Like
Yeah.
Colin Wallace has called it the double bubble technique. So,
Yeah, and you see, well, part of that, it's kind of with the Dulce base story. When the Dulce papers got released in 88, this guy right about Tal Levesque was involved with that and promoting the story and writing other stuff under a pseudonym of Jason Bishop that had to do with the Dulce base story. But then he was sharing this with other UFO researchers at the time, and all of these, like a half dozen different researchers, were getting this Dulce base material, but they were putting their spin on it. And all of these different stories all seemed to confirm the same story, but it was, you know, Tal Levesque and John Lear too, he played a role in really creating this mythos. And you have all these other people who are working with him, wittingly, unwittingly sometimes, to be like this echo chamber of repeating this story and putting it out there to different venues. So it looks like you got a bunch of independent sources confirming a lot of these stories, and really they're, you know, just coming from one place.
right on. And maybe a very good example of that was the 1989 MUFON conference. I don't know if it's split or if they all spoke, but as you wrote in the book, you know, there was, along with John Lear, who organized it, I think, or he played a big part in that 1989 MUFON conference, but also Bill Cooper was there, maybe Linda Moulton Howe,
Yep.
and Bill English, and then lastly, putting on the show of the night, Bill Moore and his famous speech, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, what happened there with that particular conference? Like, why was that such a significant moment in this whole charade?
Well, things were kind of coming to a head with the Benowitz story prior to that '89 MUFON conference where Bill Moore spoke, and get to that in a little bit. But prior to that, there was this thing I write about called the Crestone Conference, which was a year or so before that. And this was all for like, it wasn't a big conference like MUFON. It was just more like a get together with this core of UFO researchers, and John Lear and Linda Howe and David Perkins and a number of others came together. And I originally found out about this interview. Bill Moore was talking about this conference where the whole Benowitz Dulce base story came together, and they were all sharing information about this. And out of that really came, they devised, they being John Lear in particular, what this Dulce base story would be, and how all these elements later, like the Greys, that came out of the Benowitz story. So that became part of the story, and with the underground base, and supposedly they had information from this lady, Ann West, confirming the Dulce base story. And so this really, that was like '87, this Crestone conference. And David Perkins, who was there at the time, remembered John Lear wanted to put together this like mission statement, basically about the current state of affairs in ufology. And the thing they could, one thing they agreed upon was that UFOs, one way or another, were involved with cattle mutilations, but that was basically the consensus. Lear wanted to take it farther with this whole thing about an alien invasion and secret treaty and all that. And the rest were going, well, we can't really go for that, But that became John Lear's thing, and wrapped into this was this Benowitz information. And right after that Crestone conference, Lear visited Benowitz for a few days, and something happened there, and it not really clear, but they had some type of falling out, and
Maybe they got abducted together.
no, well, Benowitz just left ufology for good after that. He wouldn't talk to anybody, got rid of his phone number there, and it was like something happened between him and John Lear. There's some theories, but I think the bottom line is that Lear kind of co-opted the whole Dulce story, and maybe I know some of later Benowitz's materials ended up in other places, and Lear seemed to have a role in that. So something went on there. But what I'm getting to is that a year later, '88, is when the Dulce papers were released, which told this whole story I told before about the secret underground base and the Dulce War, etc. And Lear was the big promoter of this, and this was what was going on. He had also written a paper called the Lear Statement. This was back in the days of the old bulletin board user groups, and so these were the big stories in ufology during that period about the Lear Statement, how there's an alien invasion. This was kind of repeated by Bill Cooper, and this, it had to do with, once again, Dulce Base, the secret treaty, how the aliens were abducting humans, and even they needed to create these hybrids because they were a dying ET race. Even stories that the ETs were drinking the fluids of human children to stay alive. This sounds like, me tropes that go back to anti-Semitic stories. And some of the aliens had big noses, according to Bill Cooper. But so anyway, all this was going on leading up to that '89 MUFON conference, and Lear had a big role in organizing that. And that's when Moore, I guess, he had enough, didn't want to be associated with this. He was on the ground floor of the Benowitz affair story, but what he basically laid out in his presentation, he came clean, said he had been part of the government operation in his role to this kind of monitor ufology, but he was also, he claimed that he never knowingly fed Benowitz bad information. Who knows? But also in this speech, he pointed out how Lear, he didn't name him directly, but it was obviously who he was talking about, and Linda Howe as well, who he didn't name directly, but it was obvious who he was talking about, were pushing these bunk stories that were basically based on Paul Benowitz going down the deep end and believing, all this was an alien invasion that was working out of the Dulce underground base. And so that became a big, a big deal in ufology there. And of course, Bill Moore afterwards became a pariah and soon after left the field for good.
Right. And yeah, I think some of the footage was captured in the great documentary Mirage Men.
Mm-hmm.
And Greg Bishop has written about it and spoken about it very well, as I guess he was friends with Bill Moore, and as he said, he was working the merch booth.
Yeah.
He said he should have probably sold rotten fruit outside because of the reaction from the crowd. What I really like about the book is that you're in the community. You were
Mm-hmm.
you were a embedded journalist, if you will, and it shows that this you are presenting these criticisms with a certain amount of care or sympathy that sometimes at least for so many years, the UFO topic was just so taboo and, something that people scoffed and laughed at. But here we are now, no UFO shaming. There's less UFO shaming going on now, and, but how important it is for this new generation of searchers or whatever to know the history of domestic disinformation campaigns that have been filtered and run, and aimed at anyone who's interested in this topic. Yeah.
Yeah. There's something called UFO Twitter these days. Have you seen that?
Haven't. I think I've seen you talk about them a bit.
But yeah, I can be pretty snarky too. But that's part of the looking at the history and living through this a few times. I mean, every decade you see the same stories, again and again. It's going to be UFO disclosure. And yeah, going back, like I had my own crazy experience and, growing up, I wanted to believe. And, I grew up in that Close Encounters and In Search Of, and all of, those type of things were an influence on me. And living through these different eras in ufology, all this, the MJ12 stuff and the Dulce base, and these continue to resurface all the time. They get entered into this other story with that's going on with TTSA and that UAP report and all that. You still have elements of MJ12 in the story when DeLong first got into this. or became involved in talking to emailing John Podesta in like 2015, whatever it was. Part of the information he had to do with MJ12. And it's like, people, really? Wait a minute here. Take a step back, before you invest a lot of belief or money into this. This is one of the things they're promoting is that the MJ12 Roswell saucer crash was a real story, So you see these tropes come up time and again. The folks who are kind of new to this story, who got into ufology, UFO Twitter here in the last few years, are unaware of, don't have knowledge that this game's been played before.
Yeah, and it's amazing how some of the players are still the same. Like how you described that Nexus.
Yeah.
And Doty, John Lear is still around.
That's what I was telling. I did an interview about a week ago, and they were asking me, okay, what's up with the UAP report and all this? And I said, well, to understand what this UAP report is, you need to go back to 2017 with the launch of To the Stars Academy. But to understand that, you need to go back to like the early 70s when Hal Puthoff, for instance, a scientist, kind of pseudo-scientist who'd done government stuff, was working on this Stargate project, which had to do with remote viewing. Uri Geller and these people, psychics, they were testing, and that ended up was a CIA-funded experiment through a front group called the Stanford Research Institute. So Hal Puthoff is one of these guys who have been around for years, and in the 80s he became part of the Aviary, which was this group connected to Bill Moore and Doty and John Alexander and these same characters. During that same period, Alexander, who's with the military, had a similar group within the government that called the UFO Working Group that were looking into UFOs. So you had all these characters back then pushing for UFO disclosure, or some people weren't sure. There were different agendas. Some think it was a disinformation campaign. Who knows? But this group of people evolved in the mid-90s to be part of Robert Bigelow, the entrepreneur, who's has a aerospace company, but also involved in researching Skinwalker Ranch and UFOs, and they kind of took over MUFON, or were able to get a lot of the data from MUFON during that period, Bigelow. And part of this group, Bigelow started to research all this stuff called NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science, had these same players that were in the Aviary, Puthoff and John Alexander. Doty was allegedly involved at one time or another. And that feeds into the whole TTSA thing, because those same players are, some of the same players are involved with TTSA. Bigelow seems at least one time or another was somehow involved with these guys, according to the original New York Times story. Is probably he probably was some dark money behind the To the Stars Academy, and all of this. It's continued. They've been able to manipulate the media and keep this story going. For what agenda does this have to do with? Aerospace contracts, perhaps. One of the key players is Christopher what's his name? Christopher Mellon, who we saw on 60 Minutes just recently is tied in with Harry Reid, who is tied in with Bigelow. Mellon's been a lobbyist after serving in the government high level position. So part of it looks like a lobbying campaign. Part of it was like uh, getting stuff out, some media stuff, creating content, television shows, this or that. And other things are, when you originally reached out to me, Stephen Greer is calling it a psyop. Maybe there's multiple agendas going on here, and a little bit of all of that is going on with what has been going on with To the Stars Academy and this what this has led up to, this UAP report, which I really don't expect to be much, but I think in the people who are promoting this narrative and the fans of this, even if it doesn't appear to be much, they'll be saying, oh, no, there's a lot more going on. You need to read between the lines. It becomes kind of like a QAnon thing, trust the plan.
Right, right. I mean, to ask the question, what's being covered up, uh, in the book, you present a story of a possible cover up, or at least you're relaying the story of Nick Redfern, who seemed to investigate this, about one possibility what the whole Roswell UFO flap story might actually be covering up, as I said, and that is something that was really kind of disturbing, and the notion of Fort Stanton and medical experiments, and then basically torturous type experiments on internees, World War II POWs, some of the internees being Japanese internees. And can you talk us through that a little bit? Because I think that's one of like the core elements of the book that's just like mind blowing.
God, I don't know if I can talk you through it. Boy. Well, that was one of Redfern actually wrote about in a book called what the hell did he call that? The Body Snatchers from. I forget what the title was. That he's written so many books, but yeah, it had to do with this theory that the Roswell crash was actually, they were doing human experimentation on people with this condition called progeria,
an oversized growth or of aspects in one's head, or it's something like that, right?
Yeah, but they're also like children, though. They're stunted, but they don't have any body hair, and they look kind of like aliens. And that was part of the material that Redfern came across. And he was working with other researchers like Kathy Caston, who's no longer around. And it had to do with, that Fort Stanton's also involved with it. And that they were basically using the Roswell crash as a cover experiment. Now, this is as well might have been some type of disinformation, because Redfern came across this material from another researcher by the name of Timothy Cooper, who got a new trove of MJ12 papers in the, when was it, the late 80s, early 90s. And part of it had these leads about, these experiments going on at, connected to the hospital at, or sanitarium at Fort Stanton with World War II internees, not only people supposedly with progeria, but also, Japanese internees, allegedly. But and a lot of this new batch of MJ12 material, which was never, once again, verified. Cooper said it was the real deal, but there seemed to be evidence that maybe he concocted some of this stuff, but then it's also these papers also had some links to like Russian disinformation campaign and the Russian disinformation campaign concerning AIDS. So it's another element of all of this. These materials that Redfern was accessing. I mentioned Kathy Caston. She was another researcher, and she's passed on. She passed on her papers to Nick. But one of the things that she had gotten information on was that there was about a secret government program that was remote viewing the Roswell crash. And so that was kind of intriguing. And what I discovered that kind of maybe confirms this was going on is there's a remote viewer named, his last name's Graff. I forget his last name, Graff. He's one of the main remote viewers, and back in the timeline here, it was like the 70s. He was affiliated with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and he had put together, trying to remember, Delgraph is his name. He had put together a remote viewing group, kind of extracurricular activities. It wasn't on government time, but these were affiliated with people who worked at Wright-Patterson Base, military intelligence folks. And supposedly back then, they remote viewed the Roswell crash. Now, this was, I guess, prior supposedly to Friedman and Moore putting out the book on the Roswell crash. And so one of my theories, or one thing to consider, is that, there was a remote viewing going on, and they did remote view the Roswell crash. And to try to confirm if the Roswell crash really happened, they whipped up some of these phony documents and put them out there in the world and to see if they could get some confirmation or who would pick up on this story. Viewing angle is another thing that comes up repeatedly in the book and seems to be a part of this whole story I read about in Saucers, Spooks and Kooks, UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius.
I found that story somewhat fascinating, though, because, if it is disinfo, then it's pretty good disinfo, right?
Yeah.
Redfern said he got the FOIA documents that confirmed that there was human experimentation going on, right?
Right, yeah.
But as you said, though, like, it's where he got the information from to begin with. And that's always an important thing with seeking to determine, I guess, the veracity of information is who's telling you, and, what are their sources,
In conjunction with that, Keston got into researching a lot of these different crafts they were using, the kind of dirigible type. There were different ones, and more monitoring crafts that they could launch, and they were testing those out in the desert, in that area during the same time period when they were doing, the human, some of this human experimentation. And at the same time, the Roswell crash supposedly happened once again, where some witnesses claimed they saw these strange-looking little bald-headed guys, or they could even been mistaken for Japanese internees at that time. So who knows? It's intriguing. That I was trying to remember the name of Redfern's book. I believe it's Body Snatchers in the Desert. Intriguing read. Who knows for sure? But it's Nick does some interesting research, and he just takes the information he has and tracks it down, as far into the rabbit hole as he can.
And like you said in the book, it all started for you, right? It began and ended, I suppose, with Tal.
Yeah.
And he's another character. I mean, is he a disinfo agent? Is John Lear? Are these guys disinfo agents, or are they are they bad actors, or are they just useful idiots?
Well, yeah, it's hard to tell sometimes. I mean, you just don't know for sure where the disinformation ends and the misinformation begins. It's it's a spooky world, and in that world of spooks and kooks, you're never quite sure. Who is who is an actual spook, who is an actual kook, or who is this being used as a useful idiot.
Well, who is Luis Elizondo? That's what I want to know. Why do we all have to listen to him? Getting present of where we're at right now with TTSA, and also Bob Bigelow and the Skinwalker Ranch. And one thing too, I guess it's like those people who are coming up with the theories, but then they already have platforms and mouthpieces already instituted now, from Art Bell's Coast to Coast, where George Knapp and Linda Moulton Howe were both parts of that show, and they're now both big characters in this current UAP flap. It's interesting, and it's weird that these are the same people that and now they just accumulate a couple new people. Now you got Blink 182 guy saying now he's involved in it.
Yeah, and I think there's a good deal of astroturfing going on too, with your typical stuff, that disinformation, or you can say disinformation campaigns, or an influence campaign of a lobbying campaign. But yeah, you have a lot of these same characters. I was going to mention Bigelow before Art Bell started Coast to Coast in way back in 95. Prior to that, Bigelow funded a show called Area 2000 with Art Bell. And so there was that relationship there, and Knapp and Linda Moulton Howe, they were all a nexus. They were all interacting. They're the same folks still engaged in this story that goes on and on. I lost track of where we were taking this, but
Tal, your buddy Tal.
Yeah.
Hiding out in the Dan Aykroyd bunker underneath House of Blues in Mariposa County.
Now, I don't. Hard to say. I mean, he definitely gave off that spooky vibe, and claimed to have been working as a security officer for a number of years. But what really came to me over time, and what I believe to be was the case, that he was a lot of this the Dulce Base story that he was promoting really had to do with things he'd been involved with for a number of years. The whole Shaver mystery. He knew Richard Shaver. He put out a zine back in the day called the Hollow Earth Hassle, that has to do with the underground world, the Hollow Earth, all of that stuff, and the entities that lived down there. And at some point, he became involved in this Dulce Base story, found out what Benowitz was about, and he kind of took all those elements and crafted his own story that brought it into the science fiction age. It was kind of like Richard Shaver's story of the Diros put into the modern times, with the Diros now being reptilian ETs, etc. And so Tal, in a sense, was a myth maker. I don't suspect he was a government disinformation agent, but I don't know for sure. He definitely engaged with a lot of these people who did have these shadowy background. But what I think I was going to say, the overall Dulce story, which is the story of the Dulce War and the heroic security worker Tom Costello, was really a based composite character based on Tal himself and Paul Benowitz. And I talk about that in the book, and I asked that uh, to Tal a few times. Was Thomas Costello a real person, and or was he a composite character? He said no. He'd always tell me, no, Costello was a actual dude, and that Tal knew him in Santa Fe, etc. And as I document in the book, it's like in the appendix, I kept uh, bugging Tal about this for years and years, and he finally just had enough. And he said, "You don't get it, do you?" Thomas Costello was a made-up character because I had a larger story that I wanted to tell. I wanted to make, and in a sense, he wanted to make the whole UFO story more romantic and sexy again. And so by weaving into all these elements with the secret underground base and Dulce and alien hybrids, all of which he had a large role in propagating those myths, did indeed take on a life of its own, as we saw, as once again I mentioned the X Files, and all these stories now are embedded in UFO culture forever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess before we leave, one last aspect that you tie into the book when speaking about disinformation, and this is another big thing of today. Most of what was that ufology mythos that was being created was during the Cold War, right? So, as you said, there were Russian and Chinese spies seeking to get information about aviation technology and stuff like that. But then also on the other side of it, fighting the intelligence war, the KGB creating a number of different conspiracy theories, targeting the American population. For instance, well, like you have in the book, Operation Infection, which was a big thing in the mid 80s, where KGB floated through fake news the idea that AIDS, HIV was created inside a laboratory in Fort Detrick, Maryland, and
Mm-hmm.
and so what you also put in the book was that some of these MJ12 documents, because there's different iterations of the MJ12, it just keeps getting reinvented and rebranded. So the newer MJ12 documents seem to have elements of a Operation Infection feel of it's no longer the KGB. I don't think is it the KGB still? I mean, it's no longer the Soviet government, right? But there's perhaps the waves of foreign disinfo being aimed at Americans, so now we're in this age of, you got the domestic info being aimed at America, and then foreign disinfo being aimed at America, like Robert Anton Wilson said, don't panic, it's reality that's malfunctioning.
Mm-hmm.
You're not crazy. Like, they want you to fucking feel crazy, and but very briefly, could you just add a little spice on that, the Operation Infection element of in your book?
Well, what Redfern picked up on, and I'm trying to remember the exact connection, but a lot of the stuff that came out of this iteration of these new MJ12 papers. First of all, they came from a supposed intelligence officer with the last name of Cantwell, Cantwell, which was kind of an odd name, and later became evident that a guy named, I think it was Dr. Alan Cantwell, is the only person with a name close to that, and he was the propagator of a lot of these theories back during that period. He picked up on all this Russian disinformation about AIDS being supposedly cooked up in a lab. So that there was that angle to it, that there's a possibility that it was actually Alan Cantwell, this AIDS hoax, or this AIDS conspiracy theorist that was behind these MJ12 docs. And what also appears in these documents is a lot of the typical Russian propaganda, but it's coming from the mouth of aliens sometimes, how the aliens are chastising the American government for their things they've done in the past, the genocide of the Native Americans and African Americans. And, of course, all these things happened at one level or another, but all these elements are also used in disinformation campaigns, as we see, currently with like people trying to paint, cause these divisions in society, basically between, with race relations and, claiming that Black Lives Matters or terrorists and these type of stuff are all, the same type of, it's the same type of playbook, basically, you see in these disinformation campaigns. So basically, that's what Redfern was picking up on, some of these later MJ12 materials, that it might have been just a test case. A lot of times they're just throwing these things out there and seeing if they'll get picked up on, like the project or Operation Infection went through a bunch of different iterations. And early on, as I recall, it started with some type of publication that was out of, can't remember, Africa or somewhere, that was actually a KGB fronted news outlet, but nobody knew it was Russian.
Called the Patriot in India.
Okay, Patriot in India. And so they used that publication, which was basically a front for KGB Russian disinformation. Nothing happened, as I recall, for a couple of years. Then they pulled it out again later, dusted it off, and published the same material, maybe in a Russian outlet, but they quoted, the Patriot from India, like they were quoting an outside source. And so, that's one of the things in the playbook. And I talked about, the UFO disinformation as well. You can do the same thing, and kind of happened with a lot of the information Tal was promoting. He would feed to people, and they would repeat the same stories he gave them with different twists. So it looked like you had multiple independent sources confirming this, So, that's part of the playbook as well.
All right. Yeah, man. What a great interview. What a great show. Adam Gorightly. Man, that guy's got the knowledge, huh? Whew. Well, check it out, man. You want to hear more of Gorightly's works? Definitely check out his website. It's very simple and easy to remember. It's adamgorightly.com. ADAMGORIGHTLY.com. And if you want to read his books, Saucers, Spooks and Kooks, definitely check out his publisher. It's published by Daily Grail Publishing. You could go to their website, dailygrail.com. They have his book prominently displayed, as they should. And they're a pretty cool site, man. You know, they got an interesting perspective as well. You know, a skeptical eye towards the UFO phenomenon, but also a skeptical eye towards the skeptics, which is pretty good. It's pretty good to do. You got to stay skeptical these days. You know, a lot of bullshit out there, folks. Also, if you like the show, you like the interviews, you like what I'm doing, please check out my websites, see what I'm up to. As I said before, I just finished my book, Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. It should be published within the next year, I hope, by my publishers. Until then, you can check out what I'm writing about Robert Anton Wilson at that website, chapelperilous.us. And also check out my music page. It's propanon.com, prop-anon.com. I just got into making some cool mashup videos, and I've been posting them onto the website, so you could see what that is. And until next time, this is Propanon, y'all. Stay well, stay healthy, stay wise. Peace.